Dr. Michael Talbot, what's your take on the program itself, and of course the question that we posed in terms of the success and the lasting legacy?
Sure. I mean, the programme's obviously very, very welcome. It's long overdue to have something on the Ottoman Empire, seeing as it was such a great part of the European story. In terms of this overall question of conquest, I think we need to remember the historical background. Of course, Byzantium, as was mentioned before, was on the way out by the time of 1453. It's already been sacked in 1204 by the Latin Crusaders. So, in fact, the Crusaders have wrought their havoc in the Christian world as well as in the Muslim world. But the Ottomans are also one tribe among many on the frontiers between Islam and Christendom, and their success story comes from their ability to fight and to gain booty as well as religious success. So I think when we think about the ultimate aims and achievements of the Ottomans, we have to remember ultimately they are successful through recruiting soldiers, through gaining loyalty, through victories, and that in itself can become a means.
I think one can sort of see, by going through the program in terms of the historical facts coming out, understanding, and very rightly so, when you look at the other historical major empires that existed, what could be the reason for this very little information or knowledge available in the West about this major period in the lives of the history of the world?
Absolutely. Well, of course, it's not just in Europe, also in the Republic of Turkey too. I mean, one of the lasting effects of Ataturk's reforms is the language change, which means that immediately an entire generation, several generations, have no access to their history in any shape or form. And it's only in the past 2-3 decades, really, that historians have been going to the Ottoman archives, able to read these texts, and then make them available for the wider public. And of course, the fear of the Ottomans, which was emphasised in the programme quite well, had a lasting legacy, particularly from the early modern period, less so in the 19th century. But then that fear of conquest was replaced by the fear of barbarity with the Red Sultan narrative and that sort of.
Is there any particular area of the programme where you feel you would disagree in terms of the factual side of it?
One thing that I had perhaps some issue with was the discussion about the Young Turks a bit later on, and the idea that they're somehow twinned with democracy. The aims of the Young Turks were to re-establish the Ottoman constitution, which had been suspended by Sultan Abdul Hamid. Restoring that constitution does not equal democracy in the sense that we understand it. They wanted some sort of consultative political process. That did not mean that everyone should have a say in how the state works.
This is an interesting point that has been raised about the Young Turks and their role in terms of getting the message across. How do you sort of see it? Because it's not just that period. Now it's been seen into the new period now as well.
Yeah, I mean, the growth of nationalism has obviously plagued the Muslim world, and it was from this period of time. Of course, the British were quite instrumental in pushing and promoting the Arab revolt and so on. So from one side, around the time of World War I, we've got the Ottoman state being squeezed from the north and having lost the Balkans, and then also now faced with losing other territories. So this sort of scourge of nationalism was being pushed, and those within Turkey, which I would say misplace in using that, including the Young Turks, have got a lot to answer for. Not only that, of course, in terms of involvement in Armenian massacres and so on and so forth. And then, of course, bringing Kemal Ataturk to power. In fact, Ataturk initially said that he was protecting the state and the institution of caliphate, but then, of course, disbanded in 1924.
Sure. One aspect of the program that comes in is about the issue of tolerance, the way the Ottomans respected and tolerated other faiths. How is this actually been seen? Because it's a very important area. Is this actually been seen as a very positive sign? Or is it been seen that, no, that was just purely there for a particular purpose, as a showcase to show the conquest that has come in?
I think when you take the simple premise that in some sense this is a forgotten history, you have with that the thought, well, if we've forgotten something, what are the important things that we might need to recapture for today? And I think the perception of an empire that was sultans who were Muslim is often played in Europe as being some kind of presumption that this was sweeping away everything in its way, that it was slashing and burning, that it wasn't going to coexist with any other groups. And because that clearly isn't what the history tells you. It tells you not that they were necessarily welcome, because there were plenty of attempted
But
rebellions.
then there were periods, isn't it? Different sultans and coming along. Some of them did not accept this concept of tolerance, and there were issues of plundering that took place. There were important institutions that were destroyed. And as you've seen, some of the examples where they converted into places of worship as well. But that was just...
But I think that the point to that is that you said over 600 years, I think we've all said the same thing in a funny way. Yes. Over 600 years, you have different periods, you have different individuals, you have different circumstances. But if you look at it in its entirety, as opposed to, there are, by today's standard, I think the best way to look at this is, by today's standards, was the Ottoman Empire a great empire? No. Was any empire from that period a great empire? No. If you look at it from the standards that they were in those individual pockets in that 600 years, but you may want to be in that empire.
But then, if you were to try to relate to today's time in the Middle East, what's really happening? The whole carving of the countries, and the result, the end of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
How does, we are not nowhere any better as to what's really happening. In fact, the situation is much more serious and worse.
But there's a key to this, which is obviously, I think that comes in episode 3, but there's a key to this, which is, you can't stop the time. Nationalism isn't just affecting the Ottoman Empire.
No.
And it's not just affecting those parts of the world as well. Mm-hmm. The empires are coming to an end at in the beginning of the 20th century, and by the end of the 20th century, they're effectively gone. You could argue about economic empires, but empires, the British Empire, the French Empire, the Dutch Empire, all these empires are coming to an end over that particular century, over that period of time. And so we cannot stop the tide of nationalism.
Right.
And so therefore, when people talk about things, people have a right, individuals have a right to define what they want to be. All we were showing in the Ottoman Empire was the particular people who were living in the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
Well, rightly or wrongly, that's something that I don't have an opinion on, but they were part of a wider worldwide movement, which was, we want self-determination. The days of somebody else telling us how to live are gone.
Yeah. Right. Dr. Michael, the one other important area that covered in the program is how the Muslims, the Ottomans, attacked the other Muslims, and how they saw, initially with a very clear ruling that you cannot fight or conquer the lands of Muslims, but yet they went along and actually conquered the neighboring Muslims. That is an issue where both theological point of view and the political played a key role.
Of course, it's not without precedents in earlier and subsequent history of the Islamic world of one group of Muslims fighting another.
Yes.
And fundamentally, the Ottomans were not driven purely by religious concerns, but by economic and political concerns too. If there was a particular group that had a particular trade route that they wanted, it's part of the imperial ideology that you take it. And of course, let's not forget that the Ottomans don't have the entire monopoly on discourse in the Islamic world. You have the Mughal emperors further east, who certainly don't accept them as the caliph. You have the Shii Safavids and later the Qajars in Iran, who certainly don't accept their authority.
But then the principles of Islam, in terms of how you go about as an Islamic sort of empire, going about and literally attacking and creating havoc in other countries, how is that been seen?
Well, in terms of theology, Islam does justify the unification of the Muslim lands. And again, this is where I would disagree with Aqil in terms of saying that use of the term empire in a pejorative sense, it actually paints the Ottomani state in a way which is certainly not like, say, the British Empire or Roman Empire or others. Within Islamic law, unification of the state is of actually paramount importance. You know, if there are two caliphs, strike the neck of the second. Granted, yes, there were periods in which there were divisions in the Muslim world and so on and so forth, but from an Islamic Sharia perspective, there is justifications for reunification of lands.
So that would
and famously
entail.
Before Jerusalem was liberated, there was reunification of Muslim lands at that time as well.
But with regards to the Safavids, it's not a unification of Muslim lands. It's basically saying you're a heretic, I'm taking you out as an excuse. But the reality, as we know, is that they were fomenting trouble on their borders. So effectively, they wanted to neutralise them. So they were never in it to unify Muslim lands as such.
And of course, taking out the last Abbasid caliph in Cairo wasn't the most unifying tactic, perhaps.
No.
Sure. We're now going to the last few minutes of the program. To what extent is the history of Ottoman Empire as the program suggests very clearly, there is such a key backdrop to the events in the present day in the Middle East. Quick comments from you, Mike.
Well, I suppose part of what the programmes are doing, as with any history, its telling is linked to why we need to know today, and we take that thought.
But the events of today, that's the important point. The events today is the backdrop of what happened in the Ottoman Empire.
Well, I guess you have an Ottoman Middle East that then becomes the new Middle East, and at the point that it becomes the new Middle East, it is an immediate product of the change away from that Ottoman Middle East.
No, I think it's true. I mean, Mustafa Akyol, the Turkish writer, has that phrase, which he uses in our series, which is post-Caliph chaos.
Right.
And whether or not you subscribe to that or not, I think it makes you think, which is the end of the Ottoman Empire, whether you think of it as being an empire or a state or a caliphate or whatever, it's definitely, there's one thing you can take away from this, which is its collapse has not necessarily benefited everybody afterwards. Mm-hmm. That's not for me. That's not my opinion. That's the fact that we look at the countries, the roll call of countries that were once part of this empire. Right. The vast majority of them are not in a great state. Okay. So we have to ask ourselves, what has gone wrong, and was it the Ottomans' fault, or is it what happened afterwards?
Well, what do you think?
I mean, it was catastrophic, and many commentators said at the time, 1924. I mean, Amir Ali from the Khilafat movement in India, he said that this would be a disaster upon Muslims globally. Yeah. And of course, the evidence is there that the division of the Muslim lands into more than 40 statelets. Yep. I would go on Akyol, who has it benefited? It benefited the British, the French, the Russians, a few other colonial powers. You'd be hard pressed to find the benefit.
Suddenly we see a different view coming in. The last 30 seconds, Dr. Albert.
It's too easy to be nostalgic for the Ottomans, and what happens to them in the early 20th century is in the context of colonialism. Muslims go to the Caliphal movement because they're under European rule. Okay. The British Empire, the French Empire, they're the large Muslim empires by the turn of the 20th century, so it's their problem.
Last 10 seconds for you.
It's a long time, actually. Actually, I think in the last years of the Ottoman Empire, Ottoman achieved like a Islamism approach, policy, and I think it's a huge impact on the Middle East. Okay. I mean, the post-Islamist policy of the Ottoman.
I'm sure the second program and the third program will give us a little bit more information coming. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you once again for tuning into the program. A massive thank you to our guests, Emre Kaliskan, Jamal Harwood, Dr. Michael Talbot, Akyol Ahmed, and Mike Smith. We will be back next week to discuss about what was the Ottoman Empire's legacy. Until then, have a pleasant week to go. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.